I want to ask you about one of the things that has been quite stunning this morning, which is a feud between Elon Musk and the president's top advisor on trade, Peter Navarro.
It almost sounds like something you would hear on a playground, if you will, a couple people yelling at each other or picking a fight. But this is the administration. This is real Washington and real business. But take a look at some of these messages going back and forth, more going than coming. But Elon Musk there calling Peter Navarro the top trade advisor. Navarro is truly a moron. What he says here is demonstrably false. He went on to say a Tesla is the most American-made cars. Navarro is dumber than a sack of bricks. And you can look on your screen to see what he also there mentioned, calling him the R word. So look, Dana, the bottom line of all of this is Peter Navarro has been a long believer in a protectionist policy. He has been the leading voice here in terms of the president should not to negotiate. Clearly, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and others have gotten the president's ear because he is now negotiating. But the name calling, if you will, persists here. I guess it's a team of rivals or something, the modern day version of that, doing it on Twitter. Dana?
To negotiate with China and with Europe, the only way you want to come to the table with a Trump administration is if you can trust that what they're going to say is real. When you negotiate, whether you're talking with different governments or whether you're talking after an argument with your husband, you want to make sure that they're going to trust that what you're saying is real. And that is where he's lost the thread. Yeah,
that is very much the point there for us. As Elon Musk himself is trying to find some thread to tie a different story with respect to these tariffs. Let's listen to Elon Musk on what Europe and the U.S. should be doing right now.
I hope it is agreed that both Europe and the United States should move, ideally, in my view, to a zero tariff situation, effectively creating a free trade zone. That has certainly been my advice to the president.
I just don't even know. You know, the level of stupid that gets played out by these guys is just galling. And how do you assess the guy who's basically turned our government inside out, now whining and complaining, oh, I think they should go ahead and do take tariffs off the table. Do you think those government contracts he has and all that business he's got has anything to do with tariffs for him? What? Did I miss it?
No, I mean, watching him, watching Scott Bessent, watching Peter Navarro, watching Kevin Hassett, I honestly for a moment thought this was like a sort of series of SNL clips or late night comedy clips. I mean, the idea that we are building the platform for our future prosperity that Scott Bessent very, very courageously is trying to make out of this situation it's beyond comic. The actual tariff rate that Europe imposes on the United States, the average tariff rate's about 1.7%, and the average American one is, I think, 1.4. They're both pretty much close to zero as it is. These are tiny decimal point differences. You could reduce them to zero. I'm sure that'd give a little bit of a boost to trade. Wouldn't make very much difference. The whole premise on which this trade war has been launched is false. And the fact that Elon Musk is now considered to be a voice of sanity and reason, when he's basing his argument there on the idea that they're high, these barriers, shows that even he doesn't grasp the situation. But Peter Navarro, of course, he is kind of the Voldemort, the Lord Voldemort of trade economics. You know, even protectionists are embarrassed to listen to his arguments. And I heard him today several times go on TV and say our methodology and how we decided what tariffs to apply was absolutely sound.
Trump's man-made economic crisis, the one that currently threatens the life savings of Americans from coast to coast and all across the ideological spectrum, is straining even the most reality-challenged corners of his once airtight grip on the information landscape. The Dow today started out positive, only for the rally to fizzle. The Dow ended the day down more than 300 points. Stocks plunged after the White House announced that there will be no reprieve on tariffs for China. A whopping rate of 104% would be imposed on imports from China starting at midnight tonight. Donald Trump's tariff stink bomb is causing all sorts of economic and political chaos. It has even strained the relationship between Donald Trump and his co-president Elon Musk. Sources telling the Washington Post this, quote, over the weekend, as Elon Musk launched into a barrage of social media posts criticizing one of the lead White House advisors for President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff plan, Musk was going over that same official's head and making personal appeals to Trump. The attempted intervention has not brought success so far. Elon Musk's feud with that advisor, Peter Navarro, continued today. Musk calling Navarro, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks, end quote, and a, quote, moron, after the other guy, Navarro, dismissed Elon Musk as not a manufacturer, but a, quote, car assembler. Assembler in a CNBC interview with the third Trump guy, Joe Kernan, who, as of right now, sounds pretty skeptical of the tariff plan. Take a listen.
They're much bigger. I think they're much bigger than most people thought. And I think from policy institutes on both sides of the aisle, the methodology that was used has been universally derided as being non-serious. I think you'd have to concede that this was not the market reaction you were looking for. There's a way of maybe incrementally trying to accomplish some of the things that the president wants to do in a reasonable, serious way. And this just almost across the board has caused what you're seeing in the stock market and a lot of head scratching and head shaking on whether anyone really knows what they're doing in this case, Peter.
It's the stupid, right? As the old political axiom goes. Well, that feeling that nobody knows what they're doing in the Trump administration is the predominant view on Wall Street, even among Trump supporters who have a direct line to Trump or top Trump aides. Brand new reporting in the New York Times reveals that an all-hands-on-deck effort to persuade anyone in the Trump administration to back down from the tariffs has failed. From that report, quote, the day after the president announced his most sweeping round of tariffs last week, chief executives from major banks, including Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, had a private meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. It was organized by a lobbying group in Washington. But Lutnick was not persuaded to reverse course. Over the weekend, mega donors to Trump's reelection effort tried a different tack, pleading their case in calls to Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Those efforts also came up empty. New York Times reports that much of the conversation now centers around protecting themselves from the worst effects of Trump's trade war, which even some Trump allies now say will lead to a recession. Fox Business host Maria Bartiromo, who went all in on Trump's 2020 election lies, which she said in doing that, along with a few of her other colleagues at Fox, cost that network $787 million. But even she, of $787 million fame, cannot brush off the reality of Trump's tariff disaster. Watch this.
It is going to have an effect on Main Street. Some things will become higher priced. We will see some products actually, be raised in price because companies will pass on the cost of tariffs to consumers. I would expect that. That's why you have some people saying that we could see a recession, we'll see a growth slowdown.
For her to say that, big deal. Tensions within the Trump coalition bursting out into public view as Donald Trump loses his grip on the narrative that drove him back to the presidency. Is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With me at the table, executive editor and New York bureau chief for The Economist, Charlotte Howard's back, plus MSNBC political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here. Also joining us, former Congressional Budget Office director and American Action Forum president, Doug Holtz-Eakin is here. Doug, let me start with you. And just some economic basics. I liked what Joe Kernan said there. I think to talk to a Trump advisor and say, think tanks across the ideological spectrum have universally derided the policy, and it is non-serious, is sort of an attempt at public shaming. And I wonder what you think. It's been my conceit for 9 years that they have no shame.
Well, they certainly have not changed direction. So I don't know what you can bring to this argument. Is it additional data, the observations of foreign leaders, shaming, or, the economic conditions, higher inflation, perhaps a recession. I don't know what would change their mind, but certainly this is a very dangerous direction. A simple analogy is that we're working like mad to avoid a sunset of the 2017 tax law because it would be a tax increase of $400 billion next year, and that could cause a recession. He did that by himself last week. That's very dangerous, and it's something that ought to be unwound.
Well, let me argue it from the other side. As someone who's been covering him for 9 years, I had the same feelings about weakening NATO by siding with Russia over Ukraine, and that didn't persuade them to not destroy NATO. Do people in the business world still think he'll be persuaded not to destroy the economic order?
I don't know what the evidence would be that would change his mind. He's got take the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. To what end? What is the benefit that those tariffs are supposed to produce for the United States?
The movement is fracturing. The MAGA movement is fracturing. It was united only in the hatred of Democrats and in the desire to make the rich even richer. But they failed because now they're in power and they control all three branches and they control the Supreme Court. The Republicans will still try to make the Democrats the big bad guy, but it's harder and harder when they don't even have, Trump's first term for the last 2 years, Pelosi was speaker again. So they could make Pelosi the big bad guy, even though Trump was still president, they still had the Senate, they had the Supreme Court, all of that, right? And so they've lost their boogeyman, at least a boogeyman that unites people as much as it used to when Biden was president. And also, they are now failing to deliver for rich people, and they disagree on how to do it. And so it's led to a direct conflict between Musk and the Trump administration, with Musk now taking on Trump's centerpiece policy. Because Trump has a lot of policies, and I've talked about this. Trump doesn't believe in much, right? Even when he does evil things, it's like, what gives me power? What feeds my ego? But there's not a lot of sincere ideology there. But tariffs seem to be one of those. And Elon, maybe it's Elon's philosophy. Maybe he's more of a traditional, libertarian mindset. They're generally not a fan of tariffs. And also, it doesn't suit his business needs. Because Elon does a lot of international business. And Elon really depends on China. There's a reason why Elon will criticize Canada. He'll criticize England. He'll criticize Germany. Criticize any country on earth, seemingly, except for a couple, like China. Why? It's not because China doesn't matter or he doesn't know about China. It's because Tesla needs the Chinese market. But China, whether it's even internal stuff, all these tariffs are going to hurt the Chinese economy. And if the Chinese economy struggles, the Chinese middle class can't afford to buy a friggin' Tesla. And so this is only going to get uglier.